It was a flag. We might have missed some news.
You might have missed some news. Okay, well the first question is why are the flags at half-mast? Whenever a city worker dies on duty, and I'm not sure which city worker died, but that's generally what happens. Or in the case of a national situation. So, welcome. Where is everybody from? How many New Yorkers?
Right here.
Right here. Yay. How many New Jerseyites? New Jersey, no. Other countries?
Japan.
Japan? Thailand? China?
Earl. Just a while.
Indonesia?
Mexico.
Mexico?
They're from Japan too.
From where?
From Japan too.
Japan too. Okay, welcome everybody. Did I miss anyone? Ohio. Ohio.
Ohio.
What part of Ohio?
Columbus.
Excellent. Okay, I'm originally from the Cincinnati area.
Oh, wow.
Well, all right. We have about 45 minutes to an hour to spend looking at City Hall. It is an historic building, finished in 1812, so it's over 200 years old, which means for us, it's very old. It is one of the oldest buildings in New York City, because New York City is relatively new. And stand on that side, yes, okay. New York City didn't become New York City, well, for a few years into its history. Originally, New York was New Amsterdam, a colony formed by Dutch traders just a few blocks south of here on the tip of Manhattan in 1625. And that's the date you will see on the New York City flag, 1625. In 1664, the British, do we have anyone from England? No. Then I can say those nasty British. No, that the British came and they wanted this area. So they took over the colony from Peter Stuyvesant in 1664, and New Amsterdam became New York. Why? Why?
Because British took over.
The British took over and they renamed it. Does anybody know why? The Duke of York. The Duke, I was just teasing. The Duke of York had sponsored the mission. The 4 warships had sailed into South Street Seaport, went down to Wall Street where there was a wall. That's how Wall Street got its name. A wooden barricade. And the British knocked on the door. The Dutch answered. It was a peaceable takeover, but it was a takeover nonetheless. The Dutch thought that the British were better organized and might help them. After about a year, they realized that was not very smart, because the British wanted their trading concessions. They wanted the right to trade here. In 1664, New Amsterdam became New York. And then, of course, they established a city hall in what the location that is now Federal Hall on Wall Street is. There's a building called Federal Hall. It's a second building on that site. The first was the British City Hall. The Dutch had a small city hall down on Pearl Street. This is really the third city hall. It was built after the colonists won the War of Independence. So we had a situation in New York where New York, for a while, was the capital of the United States. And the new U.S. government was operating out of our city hall, which had been the British City Hall, then the U.S., the government. And so we needed a new city hall. And this was planned and built. There was an architectural competition. About a dozen architects and architectural firms joined the competition, and in 1802 the winner was selected. A French architect and an American architect had joined together to submit this design, and this is what one is a neoclassical design. It's very horizontal, fills up this 1,000-foot lot very well. Its doorway is looking there because the city was there. There was no city behind us in 1802 when it started, and in 1812 when it was finished. There's nothing behind it but sort of hills and valleys. There was a canal where Canal Street is. So, so the city was all here. This park here had been here since the Dutch. The Dutch had windmills here, and when City Hall was finished in 1812, there were still windmills. And this little triangle was formed because this is a very old road. This was actually an Indian path. The Indians had settlements up there, and the Dutch had settlements down there, so they were going back and forth to trade. The Indians on a good day to trade, on a bad day to raid. That was a joke, but no, a true joke. So this street here is very old, as is Broadway. So this triangular park was here. The Dutch used it to graze their cows. They used it for windmills. The British used this park for common green. And in the colonial days, if you wanted to protest against the British, you came here, right where we're standing. Or if you were a supporter of the British, a loyalist, you came here to do that. This space has always been used for rallies of all kinds, and it still is today. Hello, you here for the tour?
Hi, yes.
Come on. We're just about to go inside. Questions so far? So you know your New York history? Yes? No. Yeah? Who knows their New York history now? After that quick lesson?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what
Oh,
you just said.
Oh,
After
yeah.
a great
So by the way, I said this is a neoclassical building, which means it has its roots in the classical architecture of Rome. And if you look at it, you see Roman arches, those are round arches. You see classical columns. You see balustrades. And it's very symmetrical, which was part of the classical architectural philosophy. So if you draw a line down the middle, it's the same on the left as it is on the right. Everything is carefully proportioned to create harmony and beauty, as Vitruvius once said. All right, the building was originally built in marble and brownstone, and it was one of the first marble buildings in the city. Philadelphia was building some buildings at that time in marble, but remember, this was a very young country, and all of the buildings around here did not exist. They were very low buildings built of wood and timber and stone, and there were fortifications left over from the War of Independence, but this would have been the first monumental building. Now, it's very hot out here and very noisy, so I'm going to suggest we go into air-conditioned comfort. Good idea? A lot of people from out of the country, not everybody knows our American history, but you do, so you know what you get to do. You get to touch the toe. Actually, everybody gets to touch the toe. That's why it's so shiny. And let me just say that George Washington here was our first president, but before that, he was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army who fought against the British for 8 years. And he is honored here in a statue, and you're welcome to have your photo taken or to take a photo of George. And this statue is very important for a couple of reasons. George Washington, of course, was an important figure in our history. And here in New York, we like George Washington a lot because a lot of the battles in the War of Independence from England were fought in the New York area. The Battle of Trenton, the Battle of Brooklyn, the Battle of Staten Island, many battles here in Manhattan, in fact, right down here in Lower Manhattan. When the war was over, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, two of our founding fathers, went to France to find an artist who was up to the challenge of sculpting a statue of George Washington. And at that time, in the new United States, actually this was right after the war and before even George Washington had been appointed president, but at that time we had some artists, but not of a preeminent quality here. A French sculptor was chosen, Joseph Houdin, H-O-U-D-I-N, and he is a sculptor who had made statues of all of the aristocracy of Europe, noblemen and women, royalty, famous composers, writers, poets, philosophers, etc. And Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin hired him to do a statue of George Washington. Thank goodness they did, because this is the result. But it's important for more than that reason. It is considered the most authentic representation of George Washington that we have. The reason is, well, Jefferson and Franklin took a painting of George Washington to France with them so that the sculptor could copy it. It was a painting by Rembrandt Peale, a very well-known American artist at the day. But the sculptor said, no, I don't work that way. I work from the person. So he came by boat to Virginia, where Washington was resting after the war and before he was president, and he measured every part of Washington's body. This is a 1-to-1 scale. Washington was 6'3½", almost as tall as Abraham Lincoln. But he doesn't look that way because he's not wearing the stovepipe hat, and he's a little fuller. He is a fuller figure than Abraham Lincoln. And of course, we know he was measured. And also, it's his face. How did the sculptor get his face? He asked Mr. Washington, General Washington, if he could make a plaster cast of his face. And he did. He made a plaster cast of his face, his shoulders, his arms, and his hands. And from those, he made the statue, so we know exactly what that like. And by the way, that plaster cast is in the Morgan Museum and Library at 36th Street and Fifth Avenue. So if you would like to see that cast, you can see it. Usually people did not have a plaster cast of their face made until they died. Because before photography, that's how loved ones remembered them, unless they had a portrait painted. So George Washington, a lot of guts, sat there with a plaster on his face and his arm. The sculptor made terracotta busts of George Washington before he made the final statue in marble. This is a bronze cast. There are 6 bronze casts that were made from the original. The original is in the Capitol building in Virginia. And in any case, this particular one came to City Hall by way of, sent here for display, and the school children of New York took up a collection of pennies and bought it so that it could remain here. Now I want to just show you a couple things while you're standing here. George Washington is shown in his military uniform with his military cloak, sword, and scabbard leaning against this military column, but his right hand is on a planter's stick. This is a stick that, sort of walking stick, it's not a cane, but gentlemen farmers would walk around their farms, their plantations, and if you notice, this diameter here is just the size of a hole that you would need to put a seed into it. So planters, it's called a planter stick, they use them in Europe too. Gentlemen farmers could pretend that they were actually planting by poking their hole, having a seed put in. But they would test the soil, etc. And his right foot is against the plow here. George Washington had served 8 years in the French Indian War. He had served 8 years in the War for Independence. He really, really wanted to go back home and rest. He got home for a few months, and then they called him back up to New York and said, we want you to be president. And he resisted for a couple of attempts, and they kept begging him, and he wrote a big letter refusing. It's on display down at Federal Hall, but then he finally accepted and became our first president. Sadly, he always wanted to get back to his land. When he finished his term as president, he did go back to Virginia, but within 18 months he had gotten respiratory illness and then died. So he didn't really have a long retirement. In any case, this is touched a lot by school children, adults from all over the world who are wishing for something. Money, success, success in a new job, love, marriage, prosperity, maybe divorce, I don't know. Whatever you're wishing for, just touch this toe, make that wish. I always say, if something might bring you good luck, why not?
Only one wish?
Well, you can have more. Okay. I've tried. It's worked. It's worked. I'm still here. My wish was to keep doing this. All right, so when you're finished doing that, we're going to come around the corner here, as well as James Madison was the first president to come here soon after it was finished. Albert Einstein, the great scientist, visited here. Martin Luther King Jr. Abraham Lincoln visited City Hall 3 times. Twice when he was alive and once after he died. And the King and Queen of Holland came to visit their former colony. So far, I don't know if Queen Elizabeth stopped by here. She has been to the United States, which sadly King George III lost in the War of Independence. But imagine this is red carpet, follow me. As well as James Madison was the first president to come here soon after it was finished. Albert Einstein, the great scientist, visited here. Martin Luther King Jr. Abraham Lincoln visited City Hall 3 times. Twice when he was alive and once after he died. And the King and Queen of Holland came to visit their former colony. So far, I don't know if Queen Elizabeth stopped by here. She has been to the United States, which sadly King George III lost in the War of Independence. But imagine this is red carpet, follow me. Look left and right. And as you come into this corridor, and it is a corridor, notice that it is made to look like a Roman arcade. So 2 rows of Roman arches lined up with the doors so that light flows in. This building was designed and built before electricity. So the architects had a challenge on how to get light into a building. And they were able to do it in such a way that they married aesthetics with function. The function of getting light in with the aesthetics of the beautiful Roman arch, in keeping with the neoclassical detailing of the outside. And then as you're standing in the corridor, if you look left and right, all the way to the end of the hallway, and remember this could be just a hallway, but it's a beautiful arcade. If you look all the way to the end, you'll see the park. And here's a little secret. The architects designed this very large building in such a way that wherever you are in the building, with the exception of maybe the ladies' room or the men's room or the closet, you can see the outside. Very few employees of this building know that. But it's a way to, again, get light into the building and to create a look of spaciousness and openness. And if you notice, between where we're standing and the windows, there are a number of discrete spaces, a waiting room, a railing, a reception desk, more seating, you have dividing arches, a dividing doorway, and as you go all the way down to the end, there are meeting rooms. So a very clever and very transparent way of arranging what could be a boring hallway. Because remember, this is basically a city building. And recently, I will tell you a secret. I was in, I believe it was in Ottawa, no, not Ottawa, Quebec. And I went into an historic building that was near City Hall. And inside it was just, it looked like just a lot of plaster walls and little doorways. So that made me appreciate the interior design of this building even more. Now, if we step forward, we're going to see a beautiful space that is hidden from the outside. You do not see, if you step in, and come in closer, and what you will see is a beautiful dome sitting on Corinthian columns, and this is not visible from the outside. This is tucked into the 3rd floor. And this beautiful dome, similar to the Pantheon in Rome, or St. Paul's in London, or St. Peter's in Rome, it has an oculus, or an opening with a skylight in it. So another way to get light into the building. If you'll notice, it is sitting on marble columns, 10 marble columns that are holding up the dome. And then we have this beautiful staircase. This is an omega-shaped staircase. It's not just a simple circular staircase. It's an omega shape. And if you look closely, it's made of solid marble steps all the way up. And you can see the seams between the steps. Well, visitors in 1812, when this building opened, would have been stunned and amazed. First, they would come upon this huge monumental marble building. They'd come inside to a marble interior, not just painted wood or plaster. And then they'd walk further and see this, and they'd see the staircase. And the staircase they immediately nicknamed the floating staircase. Why? Well, it appears not to be attached to anything except the wall. And you don't hold marble steps up to a wall just with a little glue. So they called it the floating staircase because they didn't know how it was standing. How is the staircase supported? You know, if you try and put a bookshelf on a wall, you need some kind of a bracket, okay? But this doesn't have brackets, it doesn't have a side wall, it doesn't have columns. What does it have? Well, the architects were engineers as well, and the architects figured out a couple of different principles that the average person at that time didn't know. One is cantilevering. Okay, cantilevering. The marble steps are actually inserted into the wall. So the wall is providing a base for that step. And pretty much cantilevering is used if you have a terrace outside your apartment. You know, if you shut anything out and supported underneath here, this is cantilever. But if you notice, the walls are very shallow. They're not very deep. And with these big marble steps, wouldn't you feel more comfortable if the wall were thicker? The answer is yes. So what else did the architects do? Well, these steps are weight times, right? So when you have very heavy steps, one against the other, the weight of one pressing on the other person starts to have compression. And just the weight of the steps alone, sort of holding them in place. And then we have a landing that acts as a keystone and a landing down here. Just like in Roman architecture, when you put the blocks of an arch together, the keystone holds them in place and locks them against the pillars below. So we have cantilevering, compression, and the landings acting as keystone. But one more thing the architects did to make sure this was very secure. If you take a look, each of the steps is hooked over the next step, like this. Now, everybody take your fingers and do this right now and pull. Just even a little tug. You can feel the strength. It's an immediate strengthening feature. So there are 4 ways that the staircase is being held up and being secure. And 4 years ago, when we did the restoration of City Hall, the architectural firm wanted to survey the staircase to see if it was structurally still sound. And in fact it was. They noticed one slight, less than 1/4 of an inch little seam that had opened over here, and they were able to inject mortar into it. So that took care of that. So why do we have all of this grand, beautiful, sophisticated, and elegant entryway to basically a city building? Well, this building was designed for 5 purposes. One was to be the seat of the mayor. Not his home, but the seat of the mayor. So the executive branch of government, the magistrate of the city, was to have his office here. Number 2, City Hall was designed to be the seat of the city legislative branch, which we call the City Council today. Third, it was to be the home of the judicial branch. In the early 19th century, all of New York City's courts were here. So there's something called the judicial court, the criminal court, the mayor's court, the civil court. etc. And those courts have since moved out as the population of New York increased from 60,000 when the building was started to 97 when it was completed to 500,000 by 1850 to over 1 million before even the consolidation. The courts started to move out in the 1850s. But when the courts were still here, the jail was here. The jail was underneath the lobby. After the jail moved out, guess what they put in that space? A wedding chapel. Are you married? The wedding chapel is no longer here. So if somebody says I'm going to City Hall to get married, they really mean they're going to a city building a couple of blocks north of here, getting a marriage license, and having a justice of the peace marry them here. There are no longer weddings here unless the mayor of New York, Mayor de Blasio, chooses to have a wedding here. Chooses to marry someone here. But the average person who says they're going to City Hall to get married is going to a city building. So we had those four purposes here. Office of the Mayor, legislative branch, judicial branch, jail. The fifth reason, and the reason the building looks so great, is that it was designed to be the official reception center of the city. So that all those very famous people that I mentioned to you were to come here. This is where the mayor of New York was going to meet and greet all the people who were coming to New York. And by coincidence, in general, if you were coming from New York, you came by sea straight into the seaport right here. And you came here before you went on to Boston or Philadelphia or wherever you were going. So kings and queens and notables and statesmen would come here. And even today, the mayor still greets very important people here on a regular basis. Now we're going to go upstairs, and we're going to go slowly up the stairs. I know it was very hot out there today. You may or may not have eaten lunch. I don't want anybody, including me, fainting. And we're going to go up, and we're going to see the city council chamber, and we're going to see the governor's room. Now, does anybody need the elevator? Can you all do the steps? You need the elevator? Yes? No? Oh. All right, so let's go on up. When you come to the top of the steps, come on up. You can take some great pictures here from the railing. This is all original ironwork, cast iron work, from the early 19th century. The dome and all of the architectural detailing is original. It all has been restored within the last 5 years during the restoration that I just mentioned to you. And at that time, we painted and cleaned and did some repair work on the dome. This is called the rotunda, this space here. And as I mentioned, there are 10 Corinthian columns. They're all marble. And in fact, they're monolithic. They're made from one piece of marble. And that's important because it's more expensive to make a column of one piece. And it's more difficult to transport too. If you go around town, and I'm sure in your own towns, when you look at columns on buildings, and of course there are many buildings that have columns, often they have horizontal lines because they're cut in sections and stacked. If you want to do a super duper impressive job, you cut a column from one piece of stone or marble. And this is the same marble that's on the floor, the same marble that was used on the exterior of the building. These columns are fluted. That's what this is called. And they have Corinthian capitals. Corinthian is the more fancy and elegant of the three different styles, Ionic and Doric being the other two. So here we have these beautiful columns. And all of this marble came from Massachusetts. And it was taken by horse and oxen cart from the quarries to the waterways and brought down by waterways of the river down to New York, then by horse and oxen cart again brought to the site. And it is holding up this beautiful dome. And the dome may look a little shallower to you from this angle than on the ground floor. The reason is the architects designed the interior of the dome with these squares that are graduated as you go up, which creates an optical illusion of more depth. They also graduated the rosettes. So unlike, let's say, the Pantheon in Rome or others where the squares are not graduated, you get that perspective from the size of the dome. This is a little bit of an optical illusion on behalf of the architects. Now, if you notice, I told you don't see this dome from the outside. You see a clock tower, but you don't see the dome, and that's because the dome is situated in the third floor of this building. And if you notice, behind the railing, you can see a couple of windows. And those windows actually go into the offices and the office space of the third floor. And there are offices all the way around the rectangular perimeter of the third floor. And that is accessed by the open doorway across from me. Okay? Now, I want to take you into the City Council chamber. Yes, question?
So where is the clock tower compared to where we are?
The clock tower was directly over, we were standing in the corridor, and I asked you to look left and right, directly over that, and directly in front of this. So right over this medallion is the clock tower. So the architects wanted to really surprise and delight the visitor because this is totally hidden from the outside. It's one of the most surprising and secret treasures of New York City. And I think, let's go into City Council chamber. We have it to ourselves right now. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yes. Couldn't even hit it himself.
Not a free range tour. Okay. Yeah, that's very nice. If you'd like to see, you can. It's nice and cool here. But I'd like to ask you, please stick with the group and do not touch the furnishings or touch any of the city chamber accessories, if you will. This is a beautiful City Council chamber room. This is the one room that has been altered. Only one room in this building has been changed since 1812. When the courts moved out, this had previously been two courtrooms. The two courtrooms were joined into making one City Council chamber room. The council used to meet on the other side of the rotunda. So for the last 115 years, this has been a council chamber. This is where our city council meets. There are 51 city council members. And their duty is to make laws, to pass the mayor's budget, and to approve all land use. So, the budget, $86 billion, bigger than most countries. Actually, it's the fourth largest budget in the United States. The first is the United States budget. The second is the budget of the state of California. The third is the budget of the state of New York. And the fourth is our budget. So, our budget here, $86 billion, covers all the city services, health, police, fire, sanitation, education, etc. And the city council is involved in that. Also passing laws that are particular to the city Those might be the speed limit in the city, might be the age at which you can buy cigarettes in the city. Nothing to do with state laws or federal laws, just simply city laws. And the third is land use. The city council approves every building that's built, taken down, altered, or changed, or any land. So, did anybody see a building here that you liked on your visit here to New York? Anybody have a favorite building? No favorite building? Which one?
Rockefeller.
Rockefeller Center. City council approved that. Okay. Did you see any building that you didn't like? Any buildings that you don't like? No? Well, if you see a building you don't like, City Council approved that too. And what I'm saying here is that the City Council gets involved in determining what gets built, what gets taken down, and what gets preserved and what doesn't. And they don't necessarily make aesthetic decisions. They're concerned about if the building meets all of its codes, if it has all of the follows all the proper requirements for building, etc. But what it is clad in or what the shape is, they might discuss, might advise, they might want it shorter or taller or wider, depending on if they want to be concerned with light and air and the conditions of the area that it's in. But aesthetically, they let that up to the architects. Okay, that goes on here. And the city council members have these wooden desks. There are 51 of them, and big red leather chairs behind us. When the city council is in full session for a city council meeting of its members, those are in place of these plastic chairs. When these plastic chairs are in use, that means that a hearing of some kind or a committee meeting is taking place. Most of the work that I just described gets done in committee meetings. It's a huge amount of work. So there's a committee on sanitation, there's a committee on transportation, there's a committee on libraries, a committee on education. And when those committees are meeting to discuss budget issues or policy issues or laws that they want to have passed, they meet here, and people who want to listen, to participate, and speak sit in these plastic chairs. And you see the 300 there, that's a digital clock. And sometimes it's 200, sometimes it's 300. And what that means is that everybody has a right to participate. If you come as a New Yorker, as some of us are, we can come, listen, participate. But if you want to speak, you may, but you might only have 3 minutes. So when you start speaking, that clock starts, and when it goes off, the gavel comes down, and you're asked to be seated. So in particular, if you have a cause that you're interested in, something in your neighborhood is happening, and they're going to have a hearing or committee meeting, you might want to come. And has anybody done that in here? Any New Yorkers done that? Well, you can. And you can find out at nyc.gov/city council. You can find out all the proceedings, and the proceedings are usually always, I say usually always, that doesn't sound good, broadcast. And these platforms over here where the cameras are set up, everything is wired for sound and for broadcast. So you can watch it live at home. And often, since I live and work nearby, before I come here on Wednesdays to do this tour, I can be watching, live streaming the events, and it's actually better sound and visual sometime than when you're sitting in the room, because the room's crowded with people are getting up, going out, coming in, people are speaking into a microphone. So sometimes I watch from home before I come over. But everybody can do that, and if you're a New York City resident and a New York City citizen, you can participate. That's the activity that takes place here. A common question is, who sits in that chair with a star? You do. Shame on you. Whoever is the chairperson of the committee hearing or the committee meeting may or may not. It's a choice of whoever that person is. Sometimes the person likes to sit here. and often the gavel is here. The mayor does not sit there. The mayor does not participate in city council meetings. The mayor is the executive branch, this is the legislative branch. So the mayor will send messages and bills through city council members to the council meetings, but he does not participate. I should mention to you, we have some beautiful murals on the ceiling. The most important one is in the center, which you have to kind of turn and look at the way I'm standing to see it properly. Beautiful lady in a red dress. She's not sitting on a throne. She is sitting at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. And she is a symbol of New York. And just like City Hall is a symbol of New York, it too is sitting at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. Through those windows, if the trees weren't in full bloom, you would be able to see the bridge. And if you have not walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, today's pretty hot. I might not recommend it, but it's 1.25 miles across the bridge and 1.25 miles back. It's a nice 2.5 mile walk, about 40 minutes at a regular pace. Early morning is a good time to do it when it's not too hot and not too crowded, or in the evening. In any case, this painting shows New York as this beautiful Victorian lady, and surrounding her are things like abundance, education, civilization, the maritime trades. And in the foreground is a little cherub with his bare bottom to us, and he is holding a medallion. And if you look up toward the dais here, there's a city flag, blue, white, and orange, the colors of New Amsterdam. And in the middle is a medallion. It's the same medallion that our little cherub is holding, and that medallion has a cross in the middle. And the medallion is being held up by two figures. The cross is not really a cross. The cross are the arms of a windmill, which is a reference to the fact that the Dutch were here. Throughout this whole region, there were Dutch windmills. You know, Brooklyn is a Dutch word. There are Dutch words throughout our vocabulary here. And the arms of the windmill, there were windmills right outside in City Hall Park at the time City Hall was built. On either side of the arms of the windmill is a sailor and an American Indian. The sailor looks more like a pilgrim to us, but he is a sailor. That's what sailors wore back in the day. And on the right, the American Indian. So there was this knowledge that the colony of New York, the colony of New Amsterdam, was really the European civilization meeting the Native American Indian civilization. And in the arms of the windmill, on either side are barrels, which is what all of the cargo was shipped in when it left the harbor. Remember, the Dutch were here to trade. They were not here to create a new country. They did not try to create a new country. They simply wanted what? Furs. They wanted fur. They wanted beaver skins. And that is 99% of what shipped out of the seaport. And the beaver is the little animal in the upper and lower arms of the windmill. Why did they want beaver skin? Well, they sent tons of it back to Europe. And you know, beavers reproduce quickly. And they couldn't reproduce fast enough for the ships. Because the demand was so high. Beaver skin in Europe was used for top hats. And in fact, in England, the nickname for the top hat was the beaver. And they weren't made of cardboard like the kind you find in the costume shops. They weren't made of cloth. They were made of felted beaver skin. And the way they did that is they were dyed black. But it gave a very, very smooth finish to these beautiful, elegant top hats. And if you look at illustrations and paintings from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and well into the 20th century, even JFK wore a top hat to his inauguration. So for over 450 years, men in Europe and America at first every day, but then for formal occasions, we're using hats made of beaver skin. That is why the English wanted this colony. And that is why the French and the Spanish and everybody else wanted this colony. And that, by the way, is how John Jacob Astor, the famous wealthy tycoon of the 19th century, got started trading in fur. And that's why if you go to Astor Place subway station, the ceramic tile on the wall shows a beaver, a flat-tailed beaver. Astor Place, all related to that top hat. You see how fashion trends can influence our lives in ways that we don't even imagine. In any case, that is our city flag, that's our city seal. The American flag is on the left. The city banner, sort of orange, white, and blue up there, along with the medallion. The other 4 murals are sayings by presidents: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Ulysses Grant, Abraham Lincoln, meant to inspire city council. We have a very important painting of the Marquis de Lafayette. Here, the Marquis de Lafayette was the Frenchman who came and fought next to George Washington during the War of Independence. He thought of Washington as a surrogate father, and Washington looked upon him as a son. In fact, when Lafayette, as an older man, because he was here when he was 19, as an older man, he got married and he named his first child George Washington. And as an even older man, in his 40s, he came back to the United States and visited each of the colonies that he had helped fight for their independence. He's shown here with busts of Washington and Franklin on the side, which tells you how important of a figure he was. And then we have another portrait of George Washington here, which is a reproduction of a famous Gilbert Stuart painting that is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And when this was painted in the early 20th century, before photography became so accessible, it was very acceptable to have an authorized copy done, and a wealthy patron of New York City wanted to give this portrait to the city, but of course it was in Boston, so the museum approved the official copying of this Gilbert Stuart. The other piece of art I want to point out to you is a statue of Thomas Jefferson holding the Declaration of Independence. He was one of the authors of the Declaration of Independence, if not the main author. And I might mention that George Washington was not a signer. So George Washington was here fighting for independence. And we know he's not a signer because his name doesn't appear, but also on July 9th, and today is what, July 6th? So in 3 days will be the anniversary. On July 9th, 1776, 240 years ago, George Washington and his men were assembled out where we assembled, right in the plaza, and a courier from Philadelphia brought the Declaration of Independence to City Hall Plaza, July 9th, 1776. It was read to Washington and his men for the first time. After they heard it, his men became so excited and so agitated, they marched down Broadway to Bowling Green, pulled down the statue of King George III that was sitting on a pedestal there, melted the statue. It was a metal statue, melted it into bullets. So much for King George III. Ready to get up? I have to be out of this room promptly, so I don't want you to miss anything. So come on in, get cool. And we can't sit on the furniture, you can sit on the carpet, it's clean, okay? This is called the Governor's Room. If any room looks like a museum, this one does, because of its portrait collection, but we have over 130 portraits of this kind in City Hall. These are all military heroes and statesmen of the War of Independence. So, and I'll tell you about a couple of those. This room is the official reception center, reception room of City Hall. So if the mayor chooses to have an important group meeting here for breakfast or a cocktail or for a press conference, this would be it. And many mayors have had such things. And this is actually where Martin Luther King Jr. and Albert Einstein, all of those famous people were greeted here. Abraham Lincoln stood right here and shook hands for 8 hours one day. He also went through the window, opened up the window, went out and spoke to the crowd that was assembled there. So this room has gotten a lot of use. During World War II, the Department of Defense took over this room as a New York City command center. And all the windows were closed up with these shutters that are folded into the sides of the wall. This room has a lot of valuable things in it, and I'd like to show a few of them to you. First of all, especially those of you who like George Washington, this is George Washington and the room. And we have a couple of things here. First, if you come close, here's a portrait of George Washington on Evacuation Day. That's the day the British left New York, and between the horses' legs, and by the way, that's the harbor, and the ships in the background are the British ships leaving. That's down by where you catch the ferry to go to see the Statue of Liberty, right down at the Battery. And right between the horses' legs is a pedestal where that statue of King George III once stood. And the fence, the black wrought iron fence, is still there. If you go down Broadway to Bowling Green Park, you will still see the fence. The only difference is the crowns, symbol of the British monarchy, have been broken off. And the British barracks, the American barracks there with the flag flying over is gone, and the Customs House is there, which is now the home of the Museum of the American Indian, which is free and open every day. But that is Bowling Green Park. This is painted by John Trumbull, as are most of the portraits here. John Trumbull was one of the leading portrait artists of the day. Another valuable piece here is this clock that was done by a French goldsmith. There were many of these clocks done in small, medium, and large sizes, all in the same configuration, with George Washington standing next to the clock and an American eagle above the clock. And these were done in Paris, sold to collectors, mostly in the United States. There are several in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. If you go into the decorative arts section, you'll see them. There's also one in the White House. And when you watch the famous video of Jackie Kennedy giving a tour of the White House, she stops at a table where one of these is. This was, someone also brought one of these in on Antiques Roadshow a year or so ago, and it was valued at about $80,000. This desk is George Washington's personal writing desk, and it is so inscribed here, 1789. This is when we ask you, please do not touch it. Please do not touch any of the furnishings here. This is over 230 years old, or almost 230 years old. This is a desk that Washington used to preside over the Continental Congress down at Federal Hall when the United States government was first forming. It was not designed for him, but it was used by him. So this is a very important piece of our collection, and we do have it covered to keep it, to protect it. It was originally a partner's desk, which means that it was used probably by 2 bookkeepers, 2 clerks, 2 lawyers, 2 accountants. One sat on one side, one on the other. There's no front and back. They're both the same. The drawers go to halfway through, so each person has a set of drawers, center, left, and right, and each person has a set of shelves. So we'll put that back here. And how did they do the inlay? I don't know when it was inlaid, but like any kind of inlay, you can carve it with a special saw and do the inlays. We would not do that today. Nowadays, you've probably watched enough of Antiques Roadshow to know, or you've read enough to know that when you find an antique, you leave it as it is. You preserve it, conserve it, but you don't do that. However, it is important to note that somebody did it, and it is part of our evidence that it was really used. The other thing is, this was in Federal Hall down on Wall Street. That building was taken down in 1842 and the new building constructed. At that time, this desk was put into storage and then brought here. We know that it's been here since the 1840s. It appears in illustrations. In fact, I was doing research on Abraham Lincoln's visits here, and in one of the newspaper accounts there was an illustration of Abraham Lincoln meeting with the mayor, Fernando Wood, here, and Lincoln is on one side of this desk and the mayor is on the other, and the city council is around them, and the desk, exactly this desk with the portraits, are featured in this pen and ink illustration from the early 1860s. So we know that it's been here, that the records are correct. I want to mention just a couple of other things about this room. We can move down here a bit. Some of you might be noticing how nice and cool it is in here. The air conditioning is coming up through the chimney ductwork. So the flue of the chimneys, these fireplaces have not been used in a number of years, so when they were retrofitting this room, they brought the air conditioning up through those ductwork. And if you look at the ceiling, you'll see 5 beautiful trays or inset panels. And if you look at the far end, you'll see there's sort of a black strip. It's actually a gap between the roof and the cornice work, and that is where the air conditioning vents, one of the ways that the air conditioning vent is coming out. Now, some of you, particularly you Americans, might have come into this room or the city council room and been a little surprised at the color of the paint. This particular color is a color that was popular in the late 18th and early 19th century. It's called vert gris français. Vert gris français means French green, and it was the color of patinized copper. You've seen it before, Statue of Liberty. When you take something that's copper and let it oxidize, it turns this color. This was a very popular color in decorative arts. Again, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum or other decorative art sections, you can museums, you can see beautiful French ceramic pottery in this color, decorated with scenes. So this is the color that's on the walls. We didn't have a photograph, of course, of the original. We didn't have a watercolor sketch or a pastel. All we had is a brief written description that said the colors were painted in vert gris français. We copied that. Now, we didn't know what kind of draperies were in here, and I should mention that why didn't we know this? In the first 100 years of this building's existence, the paint on the walls, the floor, the carpet, the draperies were changed probably every 5 to 10 years, maybe every 20 years at the most. But in the first 100 years, there were many changes. This is a very well-used building. So that in 1900, the city wanted to sort of restore this and try and get back to its original. And the architect that tried to do that searched and searched and searched for evidence. We didn't really have a lot of evidence. So with the draperies, for example, this pattern of swags and tassels and rosettes comes from a pattern that was used at the White House. It was built around the same time and had these rounded arched windows. The fabric was taken from a house from the same era, and this pattern was taken and was brought here and was replicated, the pattern replicated here in New York by a fabric maker. This is an early 19th century pattern. It was not the original pattern. We don't know what the original pattern was. We do know, however, that the original draperies were not this color. The original draperies were what? Crimson, bright red. And when the restorers wanted to to fix up this room, they chose to do something that was complementary to this. They chose not to go with the bright red because that's definitely not in our aesthetic in the 21st century. But if we wanted to be 100% authentic, these would have been bright red. Well, I just have two more things to show you, and then we're going to be finished. The portrait above the door frame is the American architect responsible for overseeing the construction of this building. He was one of the two architects who designed the building. And this is John McComb Jr. And he's sitting in a chair in front of City Hall, the newly finished City Hall, with the plans of City Hall in his hands. And this portrait was done by Samuel Waldo and given to us by the family. It's the only one in this room that's not by John Trumbull. I want to take you into this room here where we're going to conclude. This room, which is now part of the governor's room, and there's an identical room on the other side. This room originally was a courtroom. This was part of the courts that moved out. And when the courts moved out in the 1850s and 60s, this room was decorated to match the governor's room and is sort of an annex so that when a big event occurs, we can open up all three rooms and use it, or we can close this off and have a meeting here. I want to point out all of the portraits here are military heroes of the 1812 war. So the war that was going on when this building was completed. And it's been called our second war of independence from the British. I won't go into a lot of history about it, but it's quite interesting. Henry Clay, the bust of Henry Clay is sitting there on the pedestal. Henry Clay was a senator very involved in the War of 1812. He also is the senator who proposed the first infrastructure system for the United States, canals and roadways, that would help us gain our economic independence from England. We had won our sovereignty and we had this vast land of natural resources, but we had no way to get lumber and other natural materials to the places that needed them. In 1810, before the War of Independence, we were still importing lumber and soda ash, lumber for building, soda ash to make soap from England. So the War of 1812 was an economic war as much as anything. I want to show you this table. It's a beautiful table. I know all the Americans here would love to have this table for Thanksgiving. Please don't touch it. It is very precious. All the furniture that you've seen in the governor's room and here was designed for City Hall back in 1812. This is actually not an extension table as much as four tables that fit together. The two ends that are oval actually can be taken apart, and then there are three drop leaf tables. A drop leaf table is a table with four legs, and then these two leaves can fold down or fold up. If you look underneath, there are legs that swing out from the center section to support these. If you wanted to take this apart, which we did a couple of years ago when we were refreshing City Hall, we had to move this table out, and we had it set up in the governor's room in four tables. It's the first time in about 10 years I had seen it separated. And I'm not necessarily a furniture expert, but I knew that there had to be a secret, and that was the secret. These are drop leaf tables. Very ingenious. I've never seen another one like it. But this is a beautiful example of early 19th century furniture design, as are the two desks behind you, the writing desks with the burl front cabinetry on them. The mirror at the top on the wall there with its convex surface is not a mirror to comb your hair or to put on lipstick. I'm so sorry. It's a bit too high for that. What is it for? It is to reflect the light from the chandelier in the fireplace. Before electric light, this would have been candlelight or oil lamps. and the fireplace. So as the day got longer, the sun went, as the day went on, the sunlight got shorter, and you still needed to do work. How do you reflect the light? Mirrors of this kind were used. Often you also had full mirrors above fireplaces. We don't have one here, but I'm sure you've been in some historic houses where there are big mirrors, and you think, oh, I have to stand on my toes to see myself. They weren't for that purpose. It's all reflection. And if you ever have watched the movie Lincoln, it was out about 5 years ago, it's an excellent movie to give you a sense of indoor lighting and heating. Everything was done in very low light, candles or oil lamps. People wore heavy cloaks and half gloves in the winter because heating was not existent, central heating didn't exist, and lighting is not what it is today. However, as I mentioned earlier, the architects were very well, I think they were geniuses. They thought out this whole issue of light very well, so we have lots of windows, lots of opportunities for light management. Well, we're going to walk out now, and we're going to go down the stairs and out the same way we came in. And please, we do have to sort of stick together as a group to go out. So